What could drive a person to destroy the two people closest to them and then try to erase every trace of their existence? In Indiana, a shocking double murder unfolded, leaving a community questioning how such horror could happen in a quiet neighborhood. Authorities later revealed fire was used to cover the crime, but the details of the killings raised more questions than answers. What really led to this tragedy? The morning after the fire, neighbors described smoke billowing from the home and emergency crews rushing in. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, a house fire caused by faulty wiring, perhaps. But investigators noticed discrepancies. Certain rooms were untouched by flames, and signs suggested forced entry. Why had the fire started in multiple places simultaneously? Was this truly an accident, or something far more sinister? Inside the charred home, authorities made a chilling discovery. The victims were not casualties of the fire. They had been killed beforehand. Forensic teams pieced together evidence that painted a grim picture. The ex-wife and her young son had died before the flames consumed the house. This revelation overturned initial assumptions. How could someone meticulously plan such a horrifying act without anyone noticing? What clues did the investigators find next? Neighbors recalled seeing the man, the ex-husband, acting strangely in the days before the fire. Some reported unusual behavior, sudden disappearances, and tension-filled interactions. But no one imagined it would escalate to murder. Investigators began constructing a timeline, trying to reconcile witness accounts with forensic evidence. Each new detail seemed to contradict the last. Could the community have overlooked warning signs that pointed to this devastating event? As the investigation unfolded, detectives focused on motive. Why would a man take the lives of his ex-wife and son? Financial disputes, custody battles, or personal grudges were examined, but nothing provided a full answer. Meanwhile, questions about the fire itself persisted. Could it have been intended solely to destroy evidence, or was there a deeper, symbolic purpose behind the flames? What hidden motivations might have driven him to such extremes? Evidence from the scene began revealing contradictions. The fire patterns suggested deliberate accelerants, yet certain areas remained untouched, inconsistent with accidental spread. Investigators puzzled over how the perpetrator could plan this without leaving more traces. Forensic analysis of the victims' injuries indicated they had no chance to defend themselves. How had the perpetrator managed to commit both murder and arson with such calculated precision? Could anyone have anticipated such a sequence? As the media began reporting, public outrage grew. Social media exploded with theories and heartbreak. Friends and family expressed disbelief that someone so close could commit such acts. Investigators struggled to separate rumor from evidence, knowing that sensational stories could cloud judgment. But the case refused to simplify. Each revelation seemed to raise new questions. How much of what the public believed would turn out to be misleading? Could justice move fast enough? Authorities finally arrested the man, citing mounting evidence linking him directly to the deaths and fire. The arrest sent shockwaves through the town. Yet even in custody, he provided few answers. How had investigators pieced together such a complex case so quickly? Witness testimony, forensic evidence, and digital records all played a role. But questions lingered. What drove him to commit both murder and arson in one night, and what would come next in the legal process? During pretrial hearings, conflicting statements emerged. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances offered fragmented recollections of arguments and strange behavior, but no one could predict the violent outcome. Prosecutors emphasized patterns in the evidence: calculated actions, deliberate planning, and an attempt to cover tracks with fire. Defense attorneys argued for mitigating factors, but the severity of the crime loomed large. Could the court weigh all these elements fairly, or would certain details remain mysteries forever? Investigators revealed a timeline of the night of the crime. Moments before the fire, the victims were alive and unaware of the approaching danger. Then came a sequence of acts that shocked even seasoned detectives. Evidence showed meticulous planning, from entry to the eventual ignition of the blaze. But gaps remained. What about communications or witnesses who might have noticed anomalies? How did the perpetrator avoid leaving digital or physical traces? Could something vital have been missed? Courtroom proceedings introduced forensic experts who described the intricate details of the crime scene. Patterns in the fire, combined with physical evidence, left little doubt about premeditation. Yet the defense pushed back, suggesting alternative explanations for some evidence, highlighting uncertainties in timing and sequencing. The battle over interpretation began. How would a jury reconcile these conflicting narratives? And what would ultimately tip the scales toward conviction in such a complicated and emotionally charged case? Public interest peaked when surveillance and phone records were presented. Digital footprints revealed movements consistent with investigators' timeline. Yet every piece of data also raised new questions. Were there missed opportunities to intervene? Could earlier signs have prevented tragedy? The community grappled with guilt and disbelief, wondering if subtle warnings had been ignored. What if a neighbor or relative had noticed the warning signs? Could this entire chapter have ended differently? The trial revealed emotional testimony from family and friends, painting a picture of the victims' lives before the tragedy. They described the loving nature of the mother and the boy's bright, curious personality. Their words contrasted sharply with the cold precision of the perpetrator's actions. This contrast intensified public outrage and courtroom tension. How could someone capable of such planning also have had previous relationships that appeared normal? Would these insights influence the sentencing? Detectives shared the complexities of the fire investigation. Accelerants were discovered in unusual locations, suggesting the blaze was deliberately spread. Yet some areas showed signs of delay, almost as if the fire had been manipulated. Could this indicate panic, experimentation, or simply meticulous control? Every clue seemed to both clarify and deepen the mystery. How do you burn a house in a way that erases evidence but leaves hints investigators can follow? Pause and reflect before moving forward. As the prosecution outlined the sequence of events, the court was struck by the juxtaposition of ordinary life and sudden horror. Legal experts highlighted the combination of murder and arson as an aggravating factor, increasing potential sentences significantly. Each revelation made the community shiver. How does the legal system weigh emotional trauma, premeditation, and methodical concealment together? Could this case serve as a precedent for future combined crimes, or was it unique in its cruelty? Psychologists called during the trial tried to explain behavior patterns without speculating on motive. They discussed how stress, relational conflict, and personality dynamics can contribute to extreme actions. Yet even their testimony left gaps. Human behavior often defies explanation. Could underlying psychological factors help the jury understand, or would they only complicate matters further? What does it truly take to comprehend a crime of this magnitude? Share your thoughts in the comments below. What explanation resonates most with you? Evidence continued to surface that challenged initial assumptions. Digital records, social media activity, and witness accounts sometimes contradicted the narrative investigators first considered. Each contradiction prompted reevaluation of the timeline and sequence of events. How did the perpetrator move so fluidly between opportunity and concealment? Could the community have detected anomalies sooner? Or was this a calculated, almost invisible path to destruction? The more we learn, the more questions remain unanswered. During cross-examination, defense attorneys highlighted inconsistencies in witness recollections. Memory is fragile, and their strategy aimed to introduce doubt. Prosecutors countered with forensic precision, emphasizing patterns impossible to ignore. The courtroom tension escalated. Would the jury be swayed by emotion, by evidence, or by a combination of both? Could reasonable doubt exist when both premeditation and the attempt to erase the crime were so clearly documented? Keep watching to see how these arguments unfold. The sentencing phase approached with a heavy atmosphere. Victims' families delivered statements filled with grief and questions, demanding justice. The community waited for resolution, yet no one left the courtroom untouched. What would justice look like for a crime that combined murder and arson? Could a sentence capture the complexity and scale of loss? As the judge prepared to announce the decision, every person in that room knew lives had been permanently changed. Finally, the court handed down the sentence, a combined 126 years in prison. For many, it was an overwhelming figure, reflecting both the severity and premeditated nature of the crime. Yet numbers alone cannot measure grief or community impact. How does society reconcile the need for punishment with the impossibility of undoing tragedy? What will remain in the memories of those left behind? And how does a town recover from such a dark chapter? Investigators reflected publicly on the case after sentencing, discussing how small clues, overlooked at first, led to the breakthrough. Each step in the investigation built a mosaic of actions and consequences. But even with resolution in court, some questions lingered. How might early interventions have changed outcomes? Were there signs that neighbors, friends, or authorities missed? Could the perpetrator's pattern have been identified earlier, preventing escalation? What lessons can the community take forward? Legal analysts examined the complexity of combined murder and arson cases. They noted how such crimes demand coordinated investigation across multiple forensic disciplines. Evidence that might be overlooked in simpler cases became pivotal here. Yet for every answered question, new inquiries emerged. How do investigators reconcile the human story with technical evidence? What remains unknowable despite meticulous documentation? Could the community and the justice system have acted differently at any point in this timeline? As reporters dug deeper, old neighbors shared recollections that had never surfaced before. Small observations, conversations, odd behaviors, unexplained absences began painting a fuller picture. Each testimony seemed to add complexity rather than clarity. How much can hindsight truly reveal? Could subtle patterns, invisible to contemporaries, have predicted such a violent escalation? Pause for a moment. What would you have noticed if you were living next door during those fateful weeks? The fire itself remained a focal point of analysis. Investigators explained how accelerants and fire patterns revealed intent but also left behind clues. Every attempt at concealment paradoxically confirmed premeditation. How does one balance understanding forensic detail with the emotional weight of the victims' deaths? Could forensic science alone tell the story, or is context and human observation equally vital? Reflect before continuing. What detail might you have overlooked in such a complex investigation? The perpetrator's background came under scrutiny, revealing patterns of relational conflict, but no prior record of violence severe enough to predict murder. This raised questions about risk assessment and warning signs. Could someone with a seemingly ordinary history commit such acts, or were subtle signals missed? Experts debated, and the public wondered about early detection of dangerous behaviors. What warning signs do you think mattered most in this case? Type yes or a no if you believe they were visible. During appeals and post-trial discussions, legal commentators examined whether the sentence reflected both punishment and deterrence. Could any sentence truly match the scale of devastation? The case also sparked conversation about domestic violence, mental health, and early intervention. Even with a strong conviction, communities and families are left seeking answers. How can justice address both prevention and retribution? And how do we ensure such tragedies do not repeat? Pause and reflect before moving to the next revelation. Media coverage emphasized the tragedy's emotional resonance. Stories highlighted the void left in the lives of extended family, friends, and neighbors. Yet every narrative had gaps, and contradictions in recollection fueled speculation. What did this coverage miss, and how might it shape public perception? Could misinformation or incomplete reporting alter understanding of events? As viewers, we must ask, how much of what is presented as fact might later be questioned, clarified, or revised? Investigators described the painstaking process of reconstructing the night's events, matching physical evidence with digital and testimonial records. This reconstruction highlighted meticulous planning, but also small uncertainties, such as timing of actions and exact movements. How do investigators account for these unknowns while presenting a coherent narrative? Could minor, overlooked details change interpretations? The case demonstrates the delicate balance between certainty and ambiguity in criminal investigations. What would you focus on if you were examining the scene? The trial underscored human resilience in the face of tragedy. Families, investigators, and community members all had to process events while seeking answers. Yet, even with conviction, lingering questions persisted. Why did this man act as he did? Could his motives ever be fully understood? How can we prevent similar cases in the future? Pause before the next segment and reflect. What motivates someone to commit acts that defy comprehension, yet leave behind a clear trail for justice? Legal and psychological experts debated the interplay between motive, method, and opportunity. Some emphasized the premeditation, others the psychological triggers, but none could definitively explain why the crime occurred. Each perspective offered insight but left gaps. How does the justice system reconcile these competing viewpoints? Could lessons learned in this case inform risk assessments elsewhere, or are these events too unique to generalize? What do you think played the largest role in this tragedy? Community healing became a central concern after sentencing. Support networks for friends and family mobilized, attempting to process grief and fear. Meanwhile, investigators continued studying evidence for educational purposes. Even with closure in court, the case left an indelible mark. How do communities move forward when the perpetrator's actions were so calculated and destructive? Could reflection and education prevent future tragedies? Or does unpredictability make some events inevitable? Share your thoughts below before the next segment. The broader implications of the case reached beyond Indiana. Legal scholars, law enforcement, and social services examined patterns to identify systemic lessons. Could early intervention have changed the outcome? Were there missed opportunities for neighbors, friends, or agencies to notice risk? While the sentence imposed justice, it could not answer every question. How do we balance accountability with prevention in a society facing complex human behavior? Consider this as we approach the final reflections. As we reflect on the events, it's clear the investigation achieved extraordinary resolution, yet certain mysteries remain. Why the crime escalated to murder and arson, the subtle signs missed, and the precise psychological motivations are not fully known. Communities struggle to comprehend, while families cope with loss. What lessons linger, and what remains unknowable? How can society better detect danger signs without infringing on personal freedoms? The unanswered questions weigh heavily on all involved. The 126-year sentence represents justice in legal terms, yet human tragedy cannot be quantified. Survivors and community members must reconcile grief with the knowledge that premeditation and concealment marked the crime. How will this case shape future investigations, awareness programs, and domestic safety measures? Could vigilance, education, and reporting prevent similar cases, or are some events beyond prediction? Pause and reflect. What remains the most haunting aspect of this story for you personally? Ultimately, this case is a reminder of both the fragility of life and the complexity of human behavior. Justice has been served in court, but questions linger, and the emotional impact endures. What truly drives someone to commit such acts, and can we ever fully understand it? Comment your thoughts, share this investigation, and subscribe to Crime Rift to continue exploring cases that challenge what we think we know about human nature.